Hey everybody, we're back for another awesome deck tech. Today we're going to be looking at Greasefang, the Okiba boss. This is an Orzhov commander. It is a black, white, and one colorless to cast. It's a legendary creature, Rat Pilot, and it has an effect. At the beginning of combat on your turn, return target vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of your next end step. So this is a great vehicle commander. It also has really high graveyard synergies. So we're going to get to be able to utilize, of course, the best color for our graveyard synergies is going to be black. It has a really good reanimator qualities to it. You get a lot of value from the graveyard with black through its resurrection type of effects. And also white has a lot of good looting effects too. And also stronger creatures for cheap casting costs, which does help crew our vehicles, which is also a big aspect of this deck. So let's just get right into it. I'm just gonna go ahead and zoom in on this. Perfect. All right, so we'll just get started. So what I like to do with these deck techs is kind of just start off with the lands, so we can get started right here. And the lands have a focus. Some of them have the ability to sacrifice creatures, which is very good because we want to keep the vehicles coming back into our graveyard so we can keep recurring them. Having them in our hand is kind of less ideal, but we do all have ways to also loot from our hand. So sacrificing and discarding is a big part of this deck. So having a land such as High Market, which can come down untapped, it can add 1 to your mana pool. You can also sacrifice a creature with a tap effect, and then we can gain 1 life from that. Again, we're just going to be wanting to swing with our vehicles and basically get them right back into the graveyard. That's what Greasefang really likes to do. So there's the High Market. Next card we have here is Phyrexian Tower. And Phyrexian Tower similarly adds 1 colorless, which comes down untapped. However, it also has another ability to sacrifice a creature and add 2 black mana. So not only does it sacrifice a creature, which we love, it also can net us some mana, 2 black mana, so we can keep on spending mana and getting up in our mana pool and kind of doing more broken things. That's what we like to do with this deck. So just a little information about this deck. I took this for a swing the first time I took it to the LGS on a casual commander night, and I actually took down both the pods I was playing in with it. So kind of a great result actually in terms of winning the pods. So yeah, people think this deck is really gross, and I guess it kind of is. Who would have known that Greasefang not only is good in like pretty much the standard and explorer formats, it's also good in EDH, so go figure. Mech Hanger is a really cool card for us because it's gonna be able to cast pilots for any mana. It could utilize a mana of any color to cast pilots or vehicles. It also can just create a colorless mana, and this is also very cool because it can actually accrue 1 of our vehicles for the cast of 3, and tapping target vehicle becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So very cool. Mech Hanger from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. We're going to be playing Snow in this deck, so we will have Faceless Haven. This is a changeling that just a little extra juice. Perhaps if we need to maybe make a crewer towards the late game, or even just finish off an opponent, get that extra attacker on the battlefield, the Faceless Haven can do that for us. And then what the Faceless Haven is for 3 snow mana. It becomes a 4/3 changeling creature with vigilance, has all those creature types. It's still a land. And we'll get right into our dual lands. Here, Cave of Kolos is a dual land, and it can tap for 1 mana without damaging you, or you can produce a plains or a swamp and that will actually deal 1 damage to you if you do choose that mode. So this is termed a pain land. The next land is the Bright Climb Pathway, and the Bright Climb Pathway can be played for planes, and these come in untapped, so they're fantastic. And the other option is to come in as a swamp. So you can choose either one of those modes, and that stays like that once it's placed on the battlefield in a particular configuration. Godless Shrine, this is a pure dual land. It's also termed as a shock land. It can come in tapped and won't damage you, or you can have it choose to come in untapped. It would deal 2 damage to you. A fantastic card. Godless Shrine. Exotic Orchard. This comes in untapped. It will produce mana of any color that our opponents have. Great. Rainbow Land. Those are very cheap too in price. I just got into Commander probably about 3 or 4 months ago. So I already have 3 decks. I'm kind of an addict because, I started off in Arena and kind of moved my way through the ladder, doing best of 1. And then I really got into the Brawl format, and I kind of never looked back. So there's just a few tips that if you go to a nice LGS, they're going to kind of bring you into the fold and kind of give you some nice suggestions, some of which is like Exotic Orchard. Command Tower is another one that is a staple where it really helps you with your land mana fixing. So those are really nice cards. Concealed Courtyard. This comes into the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or a few other lands. So it's a fast land. Vault of Champions. This comes untapped and as long as we can have 2 or more opponents, which meets the criteria in Commander. So it's very useful. Comes in untapped. It's a dual land. Here's the Command Tower, which I was kind of alluding to earlier. But add 1 mana of any color to our commander's color identity. Perfect dual land, comes in untapped. Fetid Heath. This is a land that can produce colorless. Will produce a plains or swamp as long as we control a swamp. So that's the criteria that needs to be met. And then it can produce both colors. Castle Lochthwain comes in untapped if I control a swamp. And it will produce a black mana upon tapping. And for a colorless and 2 black and a tap, I can draw a card and then lose life equal to the number of cards in our hands. So really good if we need to draw cards. It's just going to help us get a little bit more ahead. So Castle Lochthwain is a great land to have. Here's Fetid Heath. It produces a colorless. And by playing the plains and tapping, or swamp and tapping, so either or, you can produce 2 plains and a swamp, or 2 swamps. So just another nice dual land. We have Fabled Passage to go fetch our basics. Your land will come untapped if you control 4 or more lands. So you can go ahead and fetch up a new land. And the amount of swamps that we have in here, or plains, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9 snow-covered plains. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 16 snow-covered swamps. So that is our lands. Fantastic. All right, so what's next? What's going to be the greatest to talk about next? Let's just get into some of the cool cards here. All right, so for instance, this is definitely one of the more pricey cards in our deck, the Meat Hood Massacre. And if you're not familiar with this card, it's like a selective board wipe that also drains opponents because it stays on the battlefield. And let me read the card for you. So Meat Hook Massacre has X and 2 swamps. When the Meat Hook Massacre enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X/-X until end of turn. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain 1 life. So it penalizes our opponents for our creatures dying, and when their creatures die, we gain life. So I really love this card so much. So, I mean, obviously it's going to let us choose, it's usually going to probably take out our commander if our commander's on the battlefield, but this is just going to help us in those situations where maybe an opponent has gotten kind of to a great start. Maybe they're creating lots of tokens and they're kind of overrunning everyone. Then this could maybe have a chance to stabilize. It can get through some of those more problematic like hand tricks. Maybe for instance, like heroic intervention or some sort of hand trick where the creatures get hexproof and indestructible to end of turn. This is like a global board wipe in a way, so that the minus effect kind of gets through all those things. So the Meat Hook Massacre is going to be kind of a very strong card here. Very hard to avoid the consequences of this card. And this is Timuret Calls the Dead. And this is just going to help fuel our graveyard for 2 colorless and a swamp. Put the top 3 cards of our library, and this is through 3 chapters. So they trigger over 3 turns. So the chapter 1 is on the first turn. It comes down. Mill 3 cards from your graveyard. Then you may exile a creature or enchantment card from the graveyard if you do create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So it can create more crewers. We love creatures that can help crew our vehicles. So this is going to be a great card. It does that for 2 stages. And then for the 3rd stage, you gain X life and scry X, where X is the number of zombies you control. So a little more value, a little more life. Mills a total of 6 cards, can get us a couple zombies, so I really like it. This is a great 1-drop. This is the Okiba Reckoner raid. So for this one, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Exile the saga, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. So it for the first 2 turns it's out, it drains each of our opponents for 1 life each turn, and we gain a life. So it basically in a 4-player game, this card itself does 6 damage to your opponents, and it gains you 2 life for the first 2 turns, which is really crazy. And then it actually has a lot of synergy. It becomes in the 3rd stage a 2/2 rat pilot, and I believe it also gives all of our vehicles menace. So it's really strong. A really cool 1-drop. I really like this Okiba Reckoner raid for this deck. So there's that. And let's just get into some of the smaller piles here. These are our instants that we're going to be playing in the deck. We have Deadly Dispute, Entome, and Village Rites. So Village Rites and Deadly Dispute are our sack outlets. Village Rites is just going to let us sacrifice a creature on the battlefield and draw 2 cards. It's really great after our vehicles have done their work on the battlefield, and we can put them right back in the graveyard. Same with Deadly Dispute. Similar to the Village Rites, it's 1 more additional mana. However, it does net us a treasure token when we do sacrifice. They both draw 2 cards. So, and then Tome, this is just like a really busted card to have in like your hand opener, because it's just going to let us select any card in our graveyard, any card in our library to put into our graveyard. So we can put our like Parhelion 2 or any other vehicle that's going to really change the game. And yeah, we're going to go from there and resurrect it with Greasefang and really bring the hurt down. So yeah, great 1 mana card and Tome there. Very nice. Yeah, this deck is really gross, but it's really fun too, because I mean, I made a lot of like kind of unique card choices in here, I think, that have been really fun to like kind of explore. One of which is the Celestis. I really just like the mana from this, and the fact that it can loot and start the day-night cycle. If opponents don't play, if they just chill, or if for instance, if it goes night and then they do play a lot of spells, I can just keep looting and discarding. So it's just a lot of value, so I really like it in this deck. Arcane Signet, this is just our OG ramp here. It's going to, for 2 colorless, add 1 mana of any color of our commander's color identity. Shriekhorn, you know what's great is like the internet has a lot of comments about Magic's history. So, for instance, if you just want to like curious, you're like, well, what's a good like looting? What's a good card where I can mill, like self-mill myself? And I think I've done a pretty good amount of research on this, and I think that probably Shriekhorn is probably your best self-mill enabler in terms of just raw milling. And it can do it basically for 1 colorless. It comes into the battle filled for 3 charge counters. You tap it, and then you can put 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. Which is nice about this is like, for instance, you can have this come down in your opener, mill yourself a couple cards, and even on when you untap for your upkeep, on your second turn, you can do this again. So you net like 4 cards into your graveyard on turn 1. Before, like as your turn 2 starts. So Shriekhorn, wow, this is like a great card because we really want to fill up our graveyard as much as possible with this deck. Soul Ring, just a 1 cost artifact that basically comes down and starts giving us the ability to really get ahead. It creates 2 colorless. Turn 1 Soul Rings are always very strong. And we do have some of the 2 colorless artifacts and vehicles to kind of go with like a nice little Soul Ring opening. One of which is the Talisman of Hierarchy. This is another, along with the Arcane Signet. This is going to come down for 2 colorless. It can produce colorless, or it can produce a plains or a swamp. If you do that mode for the plains or swamp, it does deal damage to you. So just another more form of mana ramp. Same with the Felwar Stone is another form of mana ramp. It creates 1 mana of any color of our opponent's mana that they could produce. Another very useful form of mana ramp, so it produces lots of different colors because we have lots of opponents. And very spicy card here is the Portal of Phyrexia. And I encourage like players to like kind of explore this card. This is really great in Commander. I mean, you're going to get the 3 sacrifice creatures for 9 manas, high cost, of course. There is a way that we could basically cheat this out pretty quickly, and it involves Oswald Fendelbender. So there is a way to basically get to our portal in a very, very strong sequence. You could probably have it out on turn 4, I believe. You could have a Portal of Phyrexia out, and also a very strong board due to the cards that are involved with that sequencing. But the Portal of Phyrexia, when it comes down to the battlefield, each of our opponents has to sacrifice 3 creatures. Then during my upkeep, get to take a creature card from the opponent's graveyard, any opponent's graveyard, one of their graveyards, and put it onto the battlefield under my control. So yeah, really strong. Here's Lightning Greaves. This is pretty much in every deck I have, all the 3 decks I have in Commander. It's a very low cost equipment, 2 mana, and then it can be equipped onto usually our commander. Any creature that we have for 0 mana, and that creature can't be the target of spells or abilities, so keeps our creatures nice and happy. This is an interesting kind of choice, but it definitely keeps the mill going, and I am very fond of it. And so whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller puts a top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So it could help out your opponents sometimes as well if they have graveyard synergies. But overall, our deck really sings when we can put stuff into the yard. So basically this, for instance, if this came down turn 2, and during your upkeep when you untap your lands, those 2 lands that you had tapped, that would mill as 2 cards in the graveyard, and it kind of just snowballs. And the more things that you tap, and when they untap during upkeep, that's how many cards you mill into your graveyard. So very cool card, Mesmer Orb. Here's Ashnod's Altar. This is a what you would term one of our artifacts. It's a sacrifice outlet. So we want to get these sacrifice outlets out, and then we want to have our vehicles come down. We want to be able to put them back in the yard, and this is just helps us kind of keep our mana generation going, because we can sacrifice a creature and then add 2 colorless mana to our mana pool from that sacrifice creature's sacrifice. And so it's very nice. And that mana can only be used as a mana source. Okay. And that is the extent of our artifacts. Very nice. Let's get into the main event. Let's do this. This is it. This is kind of probably what you've seen, the nasty, right? With the Parhelion 2. This is the Big Papa. And honestly, it's kind of amazing. I mean, I'm sure all of you who follow Magic to an extent or, watch Explorer or Pioneer videos. I guess there's not really too many of those, but for the arena, this is kind of a notorious card, especially with Greasefang. It's quite easy to have. I mean, it's more common than not to go ahead and have a Parhelion 2 come out on turn 3. It's definitely possible, and it is very strong. It's very strong in an Explorer, and I'd say it's very strong in Commander. I mean, maybe not as strong, but I would say having this come down in, like, for instance, using an Untome effect on turn 1, playing any sort of two drop, and then coming in with Greasefang on turn 3 is going to be very strong. And I'll give you kind of the sequence I've had with this. So this was kind of gross. So this is the first game I played in the pod. So I went turn 1 in Tome. So that basically let us put the Parhelion 2, there's the Tome, let us put the Parhelion 2 into the yard. Turn 2, I played a Talisman of, I believe it's one of our mana rocks. So it's the mana rock that lets us produce black or white mana, and it deals 1 damage to you if you do utilize that. And then turn 3, I went into land, played Greasefang. I had the Parhelion out. I swung with a Parhelion and made the Angels. And then I was also able to Village Rites the Parhelion on that turn 3. And I put it right back in the yard, and I drew 2 more cards with the Village Rites. It was probably the best sequencing that you could probably have, considering, like, that is, like, kind of the ideal, right? And I had that on the first pod I played the first time I brought this deck to the LGS, and I was just like, that's what's so fun about Magic. You put these decks together, and you're like, you discuss it. Like, I am a member of the CGB dojo, so I mean, there's a lot of awesome players on there, and we just talk about, card choices, and they have different forms, and there's an EDH one, so we kind of conceptualize these decks to a degree, and kind of figure out what are going to be the choices, and of course you're going to utilize the choices that you want to play, but they always have great ideas. And when you see these kind of interactions take place in real time, that's the real reward of playing this game, right? When you have those, it's kind of a discovery, and you're just making it happen. So the Parhelion 2, if you're not familiar, this is an 8 mana card to cast, which is not a great card really, to cast it for that much mana. However, if you can put this out on turn 3 and keep recurring it and making, basically when this thing comes out, once it attacks, it is a 5/5 flyer. It does create 2 4/4 angels at the same time that are also attacking with vigilance. It's just a wild card. It's really something. And with this card, the Greasefang, it's just another level. It really got the support it needed to shine. So, and it's legendary. So we'll talk about a little bit about that a little bit later. So we do have some like utility artifact vehicles. For instance, like the Colossal Plow. I love the plow. I mean, this is probably not the best vehicle to have in our yard, you know, in the opening sequence because it has such a high crew cost. But we do have some crewers, and once we do get this going, it's going to net us some mana when it attacks and some life. So it's a very cool card, and it has good stats. It's a 6/3. Reaver Titan. These are sort of your backups to the Parhelion, just these really big bombs. So the Reaver Titan 7 mana vehicle. It's a 10/10, has protection from mana value 3 or less. When it ever attacks, it deals 5 damage to each of our opponent. It has a very low crew cost of 4. So once again, like if we can, you know, get these vehicles going, the opponents are going to be hurting. I like this vehicle a lot. I like the Necron Monolith a lot because it builds our yard. It's a good target for maybe an Entome effect or on Markgrave. So it's gonna just come down, has a lower crew cost to go according with Greasefang. It has a crew of 4. And if I haven't explained crew, it means that you could basically, if you have an untapped creature, if its power meets that criteria for whatever its crew cost is, like for instance, Greasefang's power is 4, and it meets the criteria for the 4, so you tap Greasefang and this would come onto the battlefield. After the combat, it would come back into a zone where it can't be interacted with, like typical of other creatures. For instance, board wipes wouldn't hit it. For instance, your Wrath of God and those type of board wipes, they kind of just chill on the side, just ready to come back in when you're ready to go. This one is cool because when it attacks, you mill 3 cards. For each creature card milled this way, you create 2/2 black Necron Warrior artifact creature token. Necron Monolith. Mysterious Limousine. This is going to be like a token eater. It's just going to basically come down and either from the yard or, you know, even through cast, because it's kind of in the middle. You know, it has a 5 cost. So it's not the highest, it's not the lowest. But yes, so when it does enter the battlefield, it could eat like a token. And when it attacks, it can eat more tokens. So I think it's mostly going to be utilized for token eaters. Sometimes we can eat things on our side, like a Stitcher Supplier and a Butler, and have it pop back out to get more graveyard value. But typically, we're going to really hit some of the tokens our opponents are making with these, so they won't get them back. Weatherlight has been performing very well for this deck. It's just draws so many cards. It's a 4/5. It has a lower crew cost for 3, which is nice. And when it does connect and hits opponents, we get to look deep into our library. It's about 5 cards, and then we can put an artifact, a legendary, or a saga card into our hand. So it basically tutors like 5 deep, which is really nice for us. Sky Sovereign. This is a really cool Greasefang target because when it comes onto the battlefield, it does 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. And then, of course, it has haste with Greasefang, so if we crew it, it can do an additional 3 damage to another target or the same target. So really like, and it's a 6/5 flyer, so it's very evasive. This is a very important card for our deck, the Peace Walker Colossus. It's a 3 mana 6/6. For 1 in a plains, we can have any of our vehicles become artifact creatures so end of turn. So for the low cost of 2 mana, you can start crewing all your vehicles for that, and just have them come out and start damaging your opponent. Reckoner Bankbuster. It's just another vehicle that we have on the flavor. Basically the deck. It's low cost. We do play these low cost vehicles. Obviously we want to hit big hits with Greasefang, but we do also have some synergy. Like we have Surge Hacker Mechs that do well when there's other vehicles on the battlefield. So having a good amount of vehicles is very beneficial for us. And I've discussed the Reckoner Bankbuster before, but it's definitely a good card advantage engine. Very good for us. Night Paladin. This is a very cool ETB, meaning to enter the battlefield. So when this thing comes onto the battlefield, it deals 4 damage to each opponent, which is great for Commander. It has a very low crew cost of 1 too. It's fantastic. It's only 5 mana, so it's probably one of our better vehicles actually. I really like this card too. Someone made the comment when I was at the LGS about the Thunderhawk gunship. Like, oh, what are we playing? Like manga or something? Like, what is this, anime? It's like, yeah, this is so sick. It's like a freaking. I mean, this kind of reminds me of like, I don't know if any of you ever collected Star Wars cards back in the day, but there's the Star Destroyers, and that was so sick to like pull a Star Destroyer in those packs. And this kind of reminds me of that to a degree. The Thunderhawk gunship. It's a 6-mana 6/6, kind of like an Eska's Chariot vibe. When it comes down, it creates 2/2 white. This starter warrior creature tokens with vigilance has a very low crew cost, and when this card attacks, all the creatures you have can they gain flying until end of turn. So very strong. This has been one of most of my favorite cards too. The Smuggler's Buggy. So this comes out on the battlefield. You hide away 4, so you remove the 4 cards from the top of your library. Pick one of those and it goes into exile under the buggy. Whenever this card connects with an opponent, you have the option to pop the buggy back in your hand and play the card under the buggy without paying its casting cost. So just a really cool card just to kind of keep the gas going. I mean, not a bad target for Greasefang, just to have it enter the battlefield. Go ahead and tutor a card up and of your choice and cast it. Basically, it's going to be popping back to your hand anyway, so what a cool card for this deck. This is a very cool 2-drop that we're playing, the Soul Ripper. Mukotai Soul Ripper. This card was fantastic, even in Standard. It was great in Dimir. Like right when Kaido came out, Kaido Shizuki, the 3-mana Planeswalker. This was a really cool card to have like a sack outlet and kind of like really like kind of pressure the opponent in a tempo way. You can definitely, you could probably still play this in Standard. I mean, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty is still in rotation, so you could probably still explore this to a degree. The Soul Ripper with the Kaido, and maybe there's some more of the cards that can be supported with it, so not bad. And this is good for our deck because, for instance, if we do want some vehicles in our yard, we can have the Soul Ripper come out, and when it attacks, it can basically sack that vehicle and put it back into our yard. So, really cool. This is just a big baddie right here, the Thundersteel Colossus. 7 mana, 7/7, trample haste. Has such a low crew cost too. This thing is just gonna slice. It's just big body, comes down, trample haste, deals some really nice damage. So really like the Thundersteel Colossus. One of our awesome utility cards here is the Surge Hacker Mech. This is going to be just frustrating to a lot of opponents because it's going to basically be a very cheap mana drop for us. It's going to be one of the things that we probably usually cast rather than let her recur from the graveyard. What this card does is it deals double damage based to a creature or planeswalker, I believe. Yeah, when it comes down to the battlefield. So, for instance, if you have 2 other vehicles, and when this comes down, it counts itself, so that'd be 6 damage to any planeswalker creature. So, very cool card, and it has really good stats. 5/5, crew 4. The crew cost is kind of on the higher side. However, it does have menace too, which is definitely a factor. Nautiloid Ship. This is a 4 mana 5/5 flyer, and when it comes on the battlefield, it exiles a graveyard, which is really cool. So it has that very nice exile synergy for the graveyard, when that is very helpful for Commander. And when this card connects, if any creature cards win that graveyard, the Nautiloid Ship actually will be able to, if it connects, play that creature card free of cost, and we'll be able to cast it, or not even cast it, but just place it on under our control. So a very strong vehicle right there. Just have to make sure our opponents have creatures in their graveyard, or else it's kind of pointless, right? There's just like a big dumb creature. And back to the Parhelion 2. So there we go. There's our vehicles. And we got a couple piles left here. These are awesome creatures. Rankle can really just take over the game. If you get this out on turn 4 and you have your vehicle engine going, It's going to be great because you're going to be able to take advantage of its modes because it's going to hit. It's a flyer, it's evasive, it has flying and haste. And once it connects with a player, you have the options to each player discards a card, each player loses 1 life and discards a card, and each player sacrifices a creature. We can do all these modes and we're fine as long as we have our value engine going. And it's kind of fun, like you can just go ahead and say, hey, everyone can draw a card. So we don't mind drawing cards, we don't mind discarding cards. We can do all these modes. We can sacrifice our vehicle back into our yard. It's gonna do so much fun stuff. So this is just a great flavor card for the deck. It just works so well. Seasoned Hollowblade. This is one of the cards that is going to help keep our yard nice and healthy. And it has a nice effect where basically if you discard a card, we tap the Seasoned Hollowblade and it gains indestructible. So we can do this on our, our opponent's end step before it's our turn. We can go ahead and have this put cards in our yard, our vehicles, and then when it comes to our turn, they're ready to go. So really cool card. Mire Triton. I like the Mire Triton because it only mills 2 cards. So, it doesn't have like a ton of, milling effect, but the self-mill is still good. Like as long as we keep kind of subtly adding in different ways to our yard. I also have an Aegon in here that can be thrown on turn 1. It could be cast as the throne of, I believe we'll look into that when we get to it. But basically that card mills a card on each of your upkeeps. So, and it's just basically going from that to this, turn 1, turn 2, that just constant milling, you're more likely to hit a vehicle into your yard. And I like the Mire Triton too. It has Death Touch, which is nice. And it's also a pretty decent crewer. So it can defend, and it also can help us crew some of our vehicles too, which I like. So it's a good choice for this deck. It's not terrible. The Fleeting Spirit. This is a really cool card. So, it's similar to the Seasoned Hollowblade where we discard a card from our hand, and this phases out, and then it comes back at the beginning of the next end step. So very cool, very evasive. Has a nice. You'll notice that the Hollowblade and the Fleeting Spirit have really nice crew potential. They have high power, 3/1s. They're both 3/1s. So it's almost like they're meant for this vehicle kind of recursion. Like, was there really a plan for that? It seems like this could be like a 1/3 or a 2/3 or but it just happens to be a 3/1, so it just works out really well. It really helps crew our vehicles. Here's what I was talking about earlier, the Aegon. And this is going to be utilized, I'd say, mostly for the backside. For 1 mana, you can cast the Throne of Death here. And at the beginning of our upkeep, we mill a card, and then it has some value too. For 2 colorless and 1 swamp, we tap it, we can exile a creature card from our graveyard and draw a card. So it has some multifaceted utility to it. And if we do want to play it as a creature, we can. It'd be very strong, and we will have the yard to support it. So it's a 6/6, so that's kind of nice, and has Death Touch as well. And at the beginning of our upkeep, exile 2 cards from our graveyard. If you can't, sacrifice Aegon and draw a card. So the downside, it has two colorless and 1 swamp, so it's a 6/6 with Death Touch. Is really good, right? But the downside is you're exiling 2 cards from your graveyard each upkeep, so it's sort of hard to support. If you can't support it, if you can't exile the cards from your graveyard, you sacrifice Aegon and draw a card. So you still get something out of it. So I like it. I think it's fantastic. All right, here's Braids. And Braids is really good in this deck, similar to Rankle, where at the end of our end step, as our vehicle is about to pop in our hand, we can go ahead and just sacrifice it. And then basically if it's like, for instance, an artifact creature, like our vehicle is, and our opponents can decide if they want to sacrifice either of those 2 things. If they can't, And this has to go for each opponent. And then they, for each permanent opponent that doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. So, I mean, you get a lot of value out of this card. I think it's even more brutal than the Wrinkle, to be honest. I have Luris in here because we do have a lot of graveyard synergy, and this is such a great graveyard card. I mean, remember when I was first kind of starting to play Magic and really learning like kind of more intricacies, and I remember just like you know, I was kind of started the CGB like channel like a lot when I was you know, got on the Patreon. It was fun. It was fun to like kind of explore those decks alongside with that guy, you know, and kind of look at like the different types of the kind of fun ways to explore Magic, and you know, what kind of like style do you want to play? You know, do you want to take a route for the graveyard? Do you want to kind of explore the graveyard? You know, what kind of decks do you want to play? Can you get the job done with just, you know, playing black cards? You know, what is the ideal way to go about these things? And Loris was just, you know, of course, just numero uno back then, you know, as a companion. So I was very fond of this card. I really like how it can recur things from my graveyard very consistently. I like the body on it. There's a 3/2 lifelinker. I think it's really fantastic for this deck. We have a lot of ways to get value from Luris. Here's one of the newer cards from, I believe this was from the new Phyrexia set. And there's some other choices like Mother of Runes, but I just pulled this card out of a recent pack and I was like, well, that's perfect. So, I mean, Skrelv is doing really good in Standard right now. I don't know if, like, how many of you follow that, but I mean, this card might be like the best one drop, like in terms of any of the cards from the whole Standard. I mean, its ability to like basically to be held up protection once it comes on the battlefield without having to hold up mana is kind of crazy. I don't know if any of you watch Crokies, but he played a Naya deck with Jetmir, and you know, one of the things about Squirrel was, well, you can't get into attack with it. Well, if you have a card like Jetmir that gives all your creatures vigilance, you can still swing with this thing, you know, and then you could, you know, as you're swinging, you could go ahead and tap it and provide protection to something. So it's a nutty card, man. It's a nutty. It's cool here too as a 1-drop. I mean, it can come down and kind of protect our stuff. So what a card, Skrelv. I discussed the Oswald, you know, potential a little bit earlier, but what's cool about the Oswald Feldelbender, say for instance I mean, we just kind of discussed this to an extent already, so imagine doing the Untome turn 1 and putting like a Parhelion into your yard, and then turn 2 you're playing an Oswald Fenderbender. Sure. I mean, you're not going to be able to utilize it on turn 3 with Greasefang, so you know, obviously you want to sequence this. That's why I believe I said it would be like a turn 4 type of, best utilized on a turn 4 type of action here. So what's going to be able to happen with this, say for instance, turn 4 does come around and, you know, we have some sort of vehicle in our yard that we want to like kind of utilize. We can have the vehicle come out, and then once it does its attack, for planes, we could tap Oswald and then sacrifice that artifact, for instance, a Parhelion or some other 8-mana artifact that we own. And then we could, basically, the only other artifact that we have in our library that's one more cost than the Parhelion would be the Portal to Phyrexia. So you could have a pretty fast Portal to Phyrexia, and that's like kind of a wombo-bombo combo that we kind of have in the deck. And I'm excited to like kind of explore it and see if we can pull that off over time, but I'm sure it will. It's going to be awesome. So that's Oswald. Here's Elish. And you know what else is good about Oswald is because he sacrifices the vehicle too. I mean, that's such a big part of this deck is to keep our vehicles coming back into our yard. So Here's Elishnorn and the Grand Cenobite. It's just a really strong card. It's going to help us get us over the top when we need it to, and also keep us alive. You know, come turn 7 or 8. You know, when things might be getting a little bit dicey, and we need to like preserve our life total after taking a few hits. This is gonna, you know, reduce the power of our creatures on our opponent's side, and also buff up our creatures. So that's a dual purpose. Undead Butler, pretty decent card for us. It comes down, it doesn't have a high power, so it doesn't crew very well. Probably the big downside of it, but I do like its enter the battlefield effect for 1 cost in the black. It's going to mill 3 cards into our into our graveyard from our library, and then when it dies, you may exile it, the Butler itself. When you do, return target creature card from your opponent to your graveyard to your hand, so you get a little value. So we do have some ways to kill off the Butler. It's kind of a couple various ways to do it. Stitcher Supplier, this is probably the second best self-mill effect other than the Shriekhorn. And I did do the research on that. And this will net you 3 cards on turn 1, whereas the Shriekhorn will net you 4. And then an additional 2. So the Shriekhorn is a little bit better. However, this is, you know, this is just as good. I mean, this is fine. And when the Stitcher Supplier comes on the battlefield, or dies, you mill 3 cards. So when it comes on the battlefield, you mill 3, and when it dies, you mill another 3. So I really like that card for this deck. Hotshot Mechanic. This is a great crewer. So for 1 cost of planes, it can crew as if its power were two greater for the vehicles. So basically, a vehicle sees this as having 4 power. So it's really good. Really good for us. The Hotshot. Here's the Guardian of New Benalia. This is just another selective milling that we have going on for this deck. And it's similar to what we talked, the Fleeting Spirit or the Seasoned Hallblade. And it has an unlist ability too, so you can get busy with it. If you have, for instance, you want to maybe scry, and you can enlist an untapped creature that's not summoning sick any longer. And then you can add the power to the Guardian. And so when it swings, for instance, if you had a Greasefang and you didn't need to crew a vehicle with it, you could go ahead and enlist the Greasefang, add the 4 power to the Guardian. The Guardian can swing, and what's great about the Guardian is you can discard a card from your hand and give it indestructible to the end of the turn. So it's a good attacker, and it works for our deck. It acts as that selective mill, basically selective discard into our graveyard, which is very important. So there's the Guardian. And this is a very fun choice, the Ratadrabic of Urborg. So basically, what's fun about this interaction is, I think one of the cooler things you can explore is some of our legendary vehicles, or even Greasefang itself, with the Ratadrabic on the field. If either of those die, we could bring those back as 2/2 zombies that are not legendary, but they have the same exact characteristics. So Ratadrabic did come down on a game last time I went to the LGS, and we did fall to the coma player. I'm sorry, everybody, but you know, we're gonna deal with that. But Ratadrabic was definitely doing some fun stuff. We had another Greasefang on the battlefield, so it was fun. A 2/2 zombie Greasefang. It was really cool. And back to Wrinkle. Okay, so there we go. All right, just wrapping up here. Some of our choices for sorceries. Rite of Oblivion is a Orzhov and black, and unless it sacrifice a creature and exile another permanent on the battlefield, it has a flashback for the 2 colorless black and plains. And then we have Amaria's Call. This is also a multi-face land, and for 3 plains and 4, you can create 2 4/4 angels, and all non-angels that you control have indestructible until your next turn. Very cool. And like I said, you can pay 3 life and just have this come down as an untapped plains if you like. Extinction event. I'd say exiling is very important for this format, and I mean, you got to do it, right? So why not play Extinction Event? Fantastic card. Choose odd or even. So exile each creature with converted mana cost to the chosen value. You just want to make it as beneficial for you as possible. It's going to hurt you sometimes, probably more often than not. But you really want to kind of hit those tokens that your opponents have. This is definitely a token hater. Extinction Event. Okay, Incarnation Technique. This is a sorcery that is for 4 colorless and 1 swamp. I like this card because it mills a 5 just from its cast. And then you can have the option to demonstrate it. So it basically can mill up to 10 cards. You can have your opponent recur a creature card from their graveyard. They can mill 5 cards, and if you do that option, you get to play basically cast. You can go 10 cards into your graveyard and then cast 2 creature cards from your graveyard as well. We have a good amount of creatures in here. I've had some good hits where I get like the Elish Norn and like a Braids out. It's just like perfect for me. And you can like kind of make some deals with the opponents, like, hey, you got, if you kind of leave me alone, then we can do this, and you can have your creature and then I'll have mine and be great. And this also builds your yard, so it's perfect. Incarnation Technique. You can thank Reddit for a lot of these choices. I mean, this was there. I mean, it just takes like a little bit of research. It's not the hardest thing to do. A lot of these cards are just ready to be kind of investigated, and there's a lot of shared knowledge in this community, so that's what I like about it. It's very fun. Very fun to put all these things together. Blood on the Snow. So we do play Snowlands. Our snow payoffs are Blood on the Snow and Faceless Haven. So there we go. And this card does come in handy. This was the way where I did create the zombie Greasefang the last time I played this game. I think we would have taken the Coma player down too, but they had Heroic Intervention, which is not my favorite card to play against. And when I did cast this, they saved all their Coma coils, and it was so sad. I thought we could definitely turn the corner, and have a Greasefang out, a zombie Greasefang, and my Ratadrabic coming back, and it was going to be glorious, but not that time. Unmarked Grave is an Tome effect. It's not an instant, but I mean, you can't have all these cards like kind of be reprinted and the redundancy. So this gets to Dobjan. We can put a card from our library into the graveyard, and then we can get Greasefang going. Gonna put a vehicle in the yard and the graveyard, and then have it come back out. Toxic Deluge. This is another minus effect, and you can pay life to achieve that. So for instance, if I wanted -3/-3, I'd pay the 2 mana in the black, and I'd pay 3 life, and it would do -3/-3 to all the creatures until end of turn. So just a really great card for us, just to kind of keep the opponents under control. Agadeem's Awakening. This is really good with our yard. Similar, I mean, these Emeria's Call and Agadeems are so very strong in terms of the multi-face cards. These mythic cycles from Zendikar. And so we can pay X and then 3 black, and you basically, depending on how much you pay for X, you can bring a number of creatures back with those mana costs up to, how much you pay. So for instance, if you paid 4X and 3 black, you can bring back a 4 cost, a 3 cost, a 2 cost, and a 1 cost. So like in that succession, you can't bring multiples back of the same 2 costs, for instance, or 3 costs, but you can bring back 1 of each from what you paid. So very cool. Dark Ritual. I just dream about this card. Like, I just want to do this, I just want to do this. Turn 1 Dark Ritual into like a black market connection. I just kind of dream about that stuff. Everybody does. Pretty sure. But Dark Ritual is an OG card. This is the relevance of this card is so amazing that, after, coming back to Magic after 20 some years, maybe longer. You know, this card is still a factor. It still is just awesome to play. You know, it's like kind of what gets you excited about Magic, right? Just the basically the getting into the juice, right? The cards that are juicy. And this was what it does, because you play 1 black, and then for the 1 black you can add 3 black mana to your mana pool, which is just very strong start. Very you call it fast mana. So this is kind of like our Jeweled Lotus of the deck. You know, we don't have to pay $100 for it though. So there you go. Rite of Oblivion, we just discussed that. Fantastic. And then our very last card is probably one of the more cool cards for this deck. I mean, we don't play the most creatures in here, and a lot of the Wandering Emperors, like, kind of came out first, and a lot of people are still utilizing that card, and this is seeing some play too. The Eternal Wanderer. I mean, it just came out in the new Phyrexia set. It's cool. It has a lot of interesting qualities to it. So it does have a higher casting cost at 6, but it does come in with 5 loyalty. And it does have this passive ability where it can only, once a turn, it can only be attacked by 1 creature. Can't be attacked by 2 or more creatures, so it's very evasive. Its +1 is relevant to this deck because it could blink out our big vehicles and just basically have them, instead of popping back on our hand, they could stick back on the battlefield. So, I mean, definitely some cool lines to play, especially with some of those cards, the vehicles that when they enter the battlefield, they deal damage to all our opponents. So that's really cool. Its 0 cost ability is just to create a 2/2 double striker. So just the body, and then I really love the -4. I think it's just so perfect. And the reason why is it gets through like a lot of things. It's kind of like a farewell to an extent. But so each opponent will. You get to choose a creature card on each opponent's side, and they'll have to sacrifice all the rest of their creatures. They have to sacrifice, and we get to choose a creature from our side, any creature. So we get a preference, and then we sacrifice the rest. This is good because we're playing the vehicles, and a lot of the things aren't on the battlefield. So, I mean, it's just going to be perfect for us. So I'm so excited to play this card, and I hope you enjoyed that. I think this has been a very exciting series of videos I'm bringing you today. I think the decks that I've talked about are, they've been tuned to an extent, and the power level is kind of like medium, but yeah, I mean, like I said, I took down 2 pods with this deck, the first time I took it to the LGS. So I mean, it's just awesome. I mean, what can I say? I mean, it's really fun. It's been really fun. So, all right, everybody say bye to Greasefang. Bye, Greasefang. Bye. Cheers.